a press briefing just yesterday, the MK party announced that it's officially now adopted its first constitution. National organiser Floyd Shivambu detailing the party's strategic approach, asserting that this constitution will enable them to make firm action or take firm action concerning internal issues. It'll also, he says, serve as a code of conduct for members designed to uphold discipline and cohesion. Well, let's get you some analysis on the story. Lukhona Mnguni, it's great to have you with us in studio on a Saturday evening. Thank you for coming in.
No, thank you for having me, Michelle. Always great to talk to you.
And do you agree with that this first formal document, this first formal guideline for the operations of the MK party is exactly the step that it needs?
Well, I suppose it institutionalizes the party in terms of coherently getting everybody behind one document in terms of what is expected of them. But I actually think that the Constitution as a document does something quite interesting. It also outlines the politics of MK party in terms of what it stands for, what its values are, and therefore what it expects of its membership. But it also outlines for us, for the first time, I think, the hierarchy of structures and bodies within the party. And what is quite interesting and fascinating, if you peruse it, is that the office of the president is an entity on its own. It's not imagined within, of course it's imagined within a broader national office bearers, but if you look at the structures, it's the president, the royal house, and so it cascades down to other structures, which, and then if you read the powers that are given to the president, it also tells us exactly how much influence the president of the MK party is envisaged to have, and of course almost like some unilateral powers that he also enjoys, I think in the one instance, but of course it also outlines what is expected in terms of membership. It says, if you join the MK party, you are under probation for 24 months. It would be interesting whether one feels that is, a sound, judgment to say for 2 years you are seeking membership into this party and then it can summarily, expel you from the party. But I think it begins to set the tone, and it allows us to read the nature of the political party that MK wants to be.
I'm glad you're talking about the powers of the president and what this document says about some of those unilateral powers. Jacob Zuma took to the podium yesterday for a short while, and he had some interesting things to say about why there are no plans for an elective conference for MK anytime soon. Did you listen to that?
Well, I mean, look, for any political party that is new, it's always a bit of a stretch to decide when exactly to form towards an inaugural conference. Because
well, he's outright slammed even the possibility
no,
of
of course. I mean, and it was not the first time yesterday he was slamming this, that they are too new and all of that, and they need to consolidate. Of course, by nature, they would know, and he would know, having participated in numerous conferences within the African National Congress, that conferences by nature are divisive. They do create a lot of animosity amongst people who are ordinarily comrades. And then you've got to gauge whether or not an entity is mature enough to actually go through that process. Some parties go through it much sooner than others. Others, not so much. I mean, Good Party, for example, had its conference in November last year, but it already stood for elections in 2019. It took some time, for other parties to go to conference. We've seen the IFP struggle from time to time to actually go to an elective conference. And, a number of parties, Michelle, will always make the point that either they're too new or they're too small, or there's a fear that the incumbent subjected to a conference, might not actually come back. But I think that from what we've seen of the MK party post the 29 May elections, they've attracted quite a number of other people from different political parties, your Sarah, your Shiluba, Abel Tau now recently in the city of Tshwane. It tells you that they are still in a way trying to consolidate, and whether or not in that process you've got to give that consolidation some room for it to manifest, and then you've got to say at what point will you be ready for a conference. I do think that sometimes we may be a bit idealistic about when exactly a new party should go to a conference, because we've got to ask, at what point do new political parties build viable structures that are the, I mean, we saw the EFF press briefing, for example, on Thursday, if I'm not mistaken, where they were telling us about the difference in approach, where they would have said a branch must get 10% in terms of its voter share. And then those that failed in KwaZulu-Natal, because they said only 14 of those
I think they've now said 100 votes.
They've said now 100 votes.
Yeah.
So, but you've got to have the structures for you to go to conference. So it can't just be going to conference for the sake of it. You've got to ask what are the organizational structures that make that possible. And I have no doubt that MK is still in the process of building structure.
Yeah, in fact, they're deploying officials, they say, and establishing committees in various provinces to that end.
No, absolutely. I mean, they've got a national organizer who's not a member of parliament and unencumbered by, those limitations of institution. They've got a president and secretary general who are outside of parliament, and they've really tried to ensure that as many of their top officials, office bearers, are out of, parliament or provincial legislatures so that they can embark on that process. How soon do they embark on that process to be viable enough for an election, for a conference, is something to think about, because we've got the national local government elections coming up in 2026. The 5th anniversary is on the 1st of November 2026, and we anticipate that election to take place between the 1st of November and within 90 days after then. And therefore, they will be considering all of those kind of things to say, should they go to a conference if it risks them not being coherent and united towards a local government election of 2026. It's not too far an election to consider.
That's what we're sort of, we're not really looking to 2029 yet, and everything that's unfolded over the past 5 months since the May elections tells us it's going to be an interesting road to the local government elections. We saw what happened in Tshwane just this week. There's a new Action SA mayor that's now got the mayoral chain. We saw the issues around the stability or the hopes of stability in the GNU not translating to a provincial level. Helen Zille, the federal chair of the DA, saying there needs to be a stability pact. This needs to translate down to the provinces. Fair to say, look, one of the past 5 months, it has been the MK party that has destabilized previously important and pretty stable in their power deals with the voters. The DA, the ANC, even the EFF, one might argue to say. The MK has changed our political landscape almost entirely.
Well, I think they have changed it significantly. There's much that still holds in the ordinary political landscape of South African politics, quite elitist in terms of its approach. MK has not necessarily managed to decentralize politics in a really meaningful way. I mean, I'm sure they'll probably challenge me on that one, but I don't feel that they've managed to decentralize politics away from, them being elitist packs, and that's really what the nature of this dispensation has been. I think for the DA and for Helen Zille, it's been a bit of a long stretch to expect that naturally the government of national unity, quote unquote, would translate to provinces and therefore automatically to municipal councils.
Do you think that voters would have thought that as well?
No. I mean, look, some voters did definitely think that this paves way then for a much more solidified, approach between the DA and the ANC across all spheres of government, provincially and locally. But we also know that in some municipalities, the ANC has been severely rejected by voters, and they are not interested in seeing any ANC people occupy seats in mayoral committee, in mayoral committees and all of this thing. And therefore, but for the ANC, it's important to probably undo what they did before the 2024 elections, particularly here in Gauteng.
Is it possible?
But let me finish the point. To undo what they thought I think they thought they were being clever about, was to say, let them not occupy the mayoral positions across the metro so that they may be seen as almost in the background. And therefore, as people took to the polls on the 29th of May, 2024, they would probably not be thinking of the ANC as failing in the metros, but blame all the other parties that are actually in those mayoral seats. But I think the voters are much more, educated now, and they know that, for example, in the city of Johannesburg, you had the likes of Gwamanda as mayor because of the ANC enabling that to be possible. And therefore, I think what we are now faced with are political parties thinking about the future. And I think within the ANC, there are two futures that are being gamed. The first future is 2026. So how does the ANC posture itself to at least try and regain some lost ground if it doesn't lose much more ground than it has lost in the metros, which is significant ground that it has lost. Secondly, within the ANC, the future of 2027 December. in terms of what is the kind of politics that emerges to determine the future leadership of the ANC in 2027. We know that this is the last term for President Ramaphosa, and therefore, to an extent, his own power is limited by the fact that he's on his way out, and therefore the DA probably then expects way too much from the president to be able to rein in all forms of tensions politically within the ANC that are not only dealing with their dissatisfaction with how the government of national unity was formed, but they are also using this moment politically to try and then set themselves up within the party to be visible and to be seen as championing a particular direction that may well, make sure that it endears them with branches of the ANC to be electable into various positions within the National Executive Committee and so on. Lastly, I do think that for the DA, they also find themselves in a very interesting and tricky position, which is much as they may be dissatisfied, I actually feel that they are heavily locked into this government of national unity, in the sense that even if they were to pull out the 6 ministries, what they would probably be giving to President Ramaphosa is an opportunity to appoint more ANC people into cabinet, because I don't see a situation where the DA pulls out of the national cabinet and then goes to parliament and votes with MK and the EFF to remove the president, because I think that would actually put them in a very difficult position with their own voters and their own constituencies, because this is seen as the most stable pact that you can get out of the current configuration of the makeup of the National Assembly. And lastly, Michelle, I do think that it's not always automatic, and political parties should accept, and I suppose this is the maturing phase of our coalition arrangements, where we need to accept that, coalition arrangements don't need to be same and similar across the spheres of government. In actual fact, in some jurisdictions across the world, municipal councils are allowed the space to determine through the caucuses represented in those municipalities their own coalition arrangements without the interference of, regional and national party bosses. Unlike what we saw even in the city of Tshwane, you tend to see the national bosses. Herman Mashaba had a press briefing next to Panyaza Lesufi. The NEC was represented by Mahlengi, the national spokesperson of the ANC. In other jurisdictions, it is accepted that, municipal councils must determine their own, localized coalition arrangements. And therefore, it is for political parties to start thinking very seriously as to whether or not, if they are married across the spheres, or if they are married across all municipalities. Because if you go to KwaZulu-Natal, and I don't like being a Sangoma about many things, but if you go to KwaZulu-Natal, I think that about 80% of the municipalities in KwaZulu-Natal in 2026 will be hung municipalities. And there may well be a situation where the ANC, IFP, and the DA cannot form a government, and they may need the MK to form a government in some of those councils. And then what will that mean for the MK's ability to leverage the 45% that they have in the KwaZulu-Natal legislature? Will they then say, well, if you want us in some municipalities to govern, let's reconfigure the KwaZulu-Natal government? But I think these arrangements hold for now until about 2026 and 2027 National Conference of the ANC.
But that's why I was saying to you, I feel like the entire political landscape has changed, because what you're talking about in KZN has not happened before. And if indeed it does come to fruition in 2026, that will not have happened before. We are also now past the stage of a majority government. We're probably in the next national government in 2029 going to have a fair share of the vote split between 3 or 4 parties.
No, absolutely. KwaZulu-Natal is quite a unique province in many ways, because 1994, the IFP and the ANC were in a coalition arrangement until November 2006, and started off with premiers of the IFP and then over to ANC premiers as well, and then the ANC winning that province with majority in 2009. We also saw the fundamental split that was caused in KwaZulu-Natal in 2011 by the formation of the National Freedom Party, which hung almost over 18 municipalities, which would have been governed by the IFP, and then we saw the NFP going into a coalition with the ANC. So KwaZulu-Natal for me is what I always call probably our biggest success story in terms of our democracy, where a single voter has voted for more than one party in a lifetime. And power has actually shifted in a number of ways at province and within municipalities. And therefore, what we see with MK is probably not new, but the intensity of it is definitely well felt. And I mean, a key example for me is Msunduzi municipality, the provincial capital in Pietermaritzburg. The ANC just, got hovered below 50% in 2021. MK Party won that municipality by 52% in the 29 May 2024 election. So KwaZulu-Natal is definitely open for business and is probably going to be the most exciting province to watch going forward. And it will probably, Michelle, depend on what the MK does in terms of forming itself into a coherent institution that has a semblance of some unity and a viable political program and offering. And therefore, also what may be interesting is who emerges as its councillor candidates, because we have seen in some of the by-elections, I mean, if you take the by-election in Umzumbe, where a number of ANC councillors, resigned and then stood as MK Party councillor candidates. Only one member of MK Party won a ward in those by-elections. So it's quite clear that locally, people given an offer of a candidate, they will make an assessment on the credibility of that candidate. And I think what will make or break the MK is the sense of credibility of the individuals they will deploy as councillor candidates in 2024 to ferment what you are saying, that this is a disruptive moment in KZN politics.
Yes, disruptive but exciting. They say 24 hours is a long time in politics. The months that now take us to 2026 are going to be absolutely fascinating. Lukhona Mnguni, always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for coming into studio. Political analyst there talking to us about, or rather giving us some analysis around the MK Party's announcement of its first official constitution.